Would people please find their seats? Could we ask you to find your seats, please? Could everyone find your seat, please? Welcome. Welcome, everyone, to the Rockefeller Foundation. We are thrilled to have everyone here to talk about this important initiative. My name is Catherine Bertini. I'm one of the managing directors at the Rockefeller Foundation, particularly on the food team led by Roy Steiner. We have been very proud to have been working with Dr. Fowler and his team since last Thanksgiving, last November, in supporting his efforts for the Vision for Adapted Foods and Soils. It's a brilliant, new, creative opportunity to be able to invest in different crops that have not gotten the attention that they should have, and we hope will in the future, as an effort to help meet the needs of so many hungry people around the world, especially in Africa. So we're very proud at the Foundation to be early supporters of this effort, and we're looking forward to a big impact by the organization or the initiative now called VAX. So thank you for coming. We are going to have a dialogue today after hearing from Dr. Fowler and other speakers, and then we have a very special two very special speakers coming once the panel is done. We're really happy that Reedy Clubby could be here to be our moderator for today, so I would like to turn the program over to her.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to be with you. And I want to acknowledge our participants and audience joining us via live stream. You're most welcome today. My name is Reedy Clubby. I am your moderator. I'm a journalist from South Africa, based in DC now. I'm really honored to be invited yet again to be part of a very urgent conversation, a conversation that must be followed by action and a journey towards a vision for adapted crops and soils. I cannot imagine where we would all be if we didn't have a healthy diet. I cannot imagine the health outcomes, the economic outcomes for our communities if we didn't have access to healthy food. And we get that access through healthy and fertile soils, and as Catherine has said, climate-adapted crops. These are urgent times. I don't need to tell this audience that these are urgent times. To build resilient food systems in the context of climate change and so much upheaval caused by conflict, political conflict, warfare, it is a very, very difficult time. And we hear this message amplified again and again. I was amused this morning when I saw one of the people I follow on social media saying, I'm so sick and tired of UNGA. These important people just go there. Some of them use it for show, to grab headlines and so on. And I thought, well, it's very easy for such important dialogues to be eclipsed by the pageantry of the big politics, the geopolitical machinations, but this is where the real work happens. This is where the activism, the science, the data, the political will, the finances and investments must be mobilized in order to achieve this vision for adapted crops and soils. So there are important dialogues happening alongside the UNGA, and I'm delighted to be here. I have moderated some events in different parts of the world, also focused on food systems. And there is a message that comes up again and again. It seems as if you are all in consensus. You all agree that political will is needed, that finances and sustainable investments are needed. But the one message as an observer that I see energizes the audience and around which there is wide consensus is to empower local communities, to empower local farmers, because they know how to feed people. But they need you, they need the science, they need your trust, they need your hearts, they need the investments. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be with you. This is what we're going to do. We're going to hear from Dr. Kerry Fowler, and then I will ask you, Dr. Fowler, once you've spoken to us, to please take the nearest seat to you, after which I will introduce my esteemed panelists, Dr. Kalibata, whom I seem to be following all over the world, as she's so busy on this topic that is so critical to human survival. And we'll be joined also by Dr. McCarthy and Dr. Steiner in a conversation. Thereafter, I will open the floor for some questions from the audience. In fact, it's a good idea for you to start thinking right now about not a speech, but that one comment or question that you would like to ask. And then after that, I'm going to be a little strict with time because we have the Secretary of State joining us at some point, and we wouldn't want to keep him waiting. So, without much ado, Dr. Kerry Fowler.
Thank you. Let me begin by just thanking the Rockefeller Foundation for hosting us today. The Rockefeller Foundation has supported us every step of the way from the first step that we took in this project. And I also want to say that this is not a newfound interest of the Rockefeller Foundation. The Rockefeller Foundation's interest and commitment to global food security goes back at least to the 1940s. It actually goes back farther than that because the work in the 1940s with Norman Borlaug at CIMMYT and other places really was based on some of the health work that they did in the American South, where I come from, where they worked on nutrition problems associated with people, perhaps some of my ancestors, I don't know, eating a diet too heavily involved with maize at that point and not a diverse diet. We're going to talk a little bit about that later. We're all here because we care about food security, but I think there's one other thing that joins us all, and that is that I think we have a nagging suspicion that something about this food crisis is different. Something is different this time. Numbers are greater. Numbers of food insecure people are greater. The crises seem to be more frequent. The causes seem to be larger in number, and they seem to be more intractable, not just one-off or temporary. We've also, since the late 1970s, had an unbroken string of months in which the global average temperature for that month exceeded the 20th century average. Something is really different. But despite all this evidence that something is different, it's not always clear to me that our analysis of the situation or our response to the situation has quite caught up with this reality. This is not a moment where business as usual is the appropriate response. Business as usual is not going to give us the amount of change needed to reverse course and to avoid disaster. It's not that incremental change is bad. In agriculture, sometimes incremental change is necessary. You can't always take a big leap forward. Small steps are required. But since the Green Revolution days, more than half a century ago, we've become accustomed to incremental change. And I think one message I want to give you today is maybe we shouldn't become so accustomed to that. Maybe it's something we can't bank on. Moreover, in the face of the kind of challenges that we face, we know that the current pace of incremental change in crop yields, for example, is going to leave us far short of where we need to be by 2050. So we need to think boldly, we need to act boldly, We need some game-changing developments in agriculture and food security, and I'm here today to talk about one of them. Earlier this year, we announced the Vision for Adapted Crops and Soils, or VACS as we're calling it. It was premised on the understanding that food security fundamentally depends on fertile soils and adapted crops, or put another way, degraded soils and unadapted crops are never going to provide for food security. Indeed, even today's production levels might not be sustainable. We decided initially to focus on Africa, and we decided to focus on the two fundamentals of food security, soils and crops. On soils, we seek to help African governments and farmers answer four fundamental questions. The first is where to plant. The answer to that question will help governments to promote effective land use planning, underpin the infrastructure development that they're undertaking, and of course underpin better food production itself. Second question, what to plant? That helps farmers and governments make good decisions to maximize productivity, resilience, and nutrition. Third question, what management system to employ? That's where we have to integrate everything we know about the environment, about the soils, about the crop varieties, to help farmers make informed decisions. And finally, how do you apply all that in a given year, in a given season? That's where we hope to expand the access to hyperlocal, timely recommendations to help farmers make the kind of management decisions in real time that they need, be better managers of their inputs, such as fertilizer. Africa is the continent where precision agriculture is more needed than anywhere else in the world. Farmers need that kind of detailed scientific knowledge about their soils that good management and sustainable practices require. So with the soils work, we're working with a number of partners, principally with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, with the CGIAR, with the International Fertilizer Development Center, and at least from the U.S. government perspective, all of that work is going through our USAID-led Feed the Future program. On the crop side, we have partnered with the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization and the Africa Union. They are co-sponsoring our work. And we've focused on nutrition, not just calories, because we know that staples alone cannot provide the kind of adequate, balanced nutrition that everyone on Earth deserves and requires. This requires access to a broad variety of foods and the micro and the macronutrients that they provide. Over-reliance on a few staples, often just one staple, is risky. And in the best of years, it can't provide an adequate diet or balanced nutrition for everyone. The good news is that Africa is rich in nutrition-rich, traditional and indigenous crops, which have suffered from years of neglect and underinvestment. The Africa Union's common position on food systems makes this point over and over again. Expanding the spotlight and investments in these crops can unlock the potential to provide better nutrition, rebuild soils, support local communities and their cultures, and strengthen resilience. And one of the things that really thrills me the most is that most of the crops we're talking about are tended by women. And serving the interest of women farmers in Africa serves the interest of children. So with the crops work, we're working with a broad number of partners. Of course, with the Africa Union and with FAO. I want to particularly call out the Feed the Future program and our friends and colleagues at the U.S. Agency for International Development. We're also working with the African Orphan Crops Consortium, with the Columbia Climate School, and with AgMIP, with Havos AI, with the CGIAR, and others inside the U.S. government. I'll mention the Treasury Department and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And with all these, we have developed a 3-step program. The first step was to look at all those traditional and indigenous crops in Africa. There's some 300 of them. And to ask ourselves, which are those crops that have the most potential for providing more nutrition? We narrowed that list of 300 down to 60. The next step will be undertaken here at the Rockefeller Foundation in a few weeks, where we'll look at those 60 crops and ask, well, how are they going to do in a climate-changed world? And on the basis of knowing which crops have the most potential nutritionally and which of those have the most potential to provide good production in Africa, we can make informed decisions on crop breeding and other efforts. And then, of course, the third effort is to establish the mechanisms needed to support that kind of work in a sustainable and fundamental way. You'll hear more about that later. This doesn't mean that the United States or any of us involved in this effort are abandoning our work on major crops. It simply means that we're adding to this and taking advantage of the really tremendous cost-benefit ratio and the human health benefits that some of these traditional and indigenous crops offer. What are these crops? Well, they're crops like pigeon pea and grass pea and lob and African yam bean. All of those are legumes that will help build soil as well. Spider plant, moringa and fonio, and African eggplant and African custard apple. But there are also some crops that are fairly familiar to us that are major crops but still need much more work, and that's sorghum and finger millet, okra, yams, cowpea. We go on. Governments in Africa that we work with will have to help us by providing an enabling atmosphere to do this kind of work, and that will mean collection and use of the plant genetic resources that are needed and facilitation of the technology required. Now, the program that I'm talking about is not going to solve all problems. No program could. But it does address 2 fundamental prerequisites for food security: having good soils and good crops. So I want today to ask all of you, please, to join with us. FACTS is one game-changing initiative. We need more. And that's why we think that countries need to invest more in agricultural research and development. We have to become aspirational. That could mean nitrogen-fixing grains. It could mean perennial grains. It could mean improvements in photosynthesis. It could mean using microorganisms and fungi as food sources. It could mean addressing aflatoxin, mycotoxin problems that rob us and poison our food. It could mean a lot of different things, but we have to be aspirational and we have to think big. To strengthen food security and increase resilience, we need the kind of intergenerational and transformative initiatives that we're proposing today with FACTS. And for this to happen, which it must, we need a dramatic change in the conversation that we have about food security, a change in the dialogue. I hope today is the beginning of that kind of conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fowler. We'll speak more about your vision, our vision, and the urgency. It's a pleasure to welcome Dr. Agnes Kalibata, who has been the president of AGRA since 2014. She leads the organization's effort to mobilize the public and private sector to create agricultural growth that is sustainable and that is inclusive. Welcome, Dr. Kalibata. And joining her on the panel is Dr. Dilys McCarthy, who's a senior research fellow with soil and irrigation at the Research Center at the University of Ghana. And we are particularly interested, Dr. McCarthy, to hear your thoughts, your work on the impact of climate change on soil. I can't wait to hear about that. Thank you. And also joining this conversation, it's a pleasure to welcome Dr. Roy Steiner, who is the Senior Vice President for the Food Initiative at the Rockefeller Foundation. Dr. Kalibata, I'm going to start with you. Dr. Fowler talked about something being different. The enormity of the problem is different. We have so much work to do. Your thoughts on where we start, and also linking that with the conversation that was had in Tanzania and Dar es Salaam on this very same topic.
No, thank you. And I just want to start by appreciating what you just presented, Dr. Fowler. And maybe even, let me just tell this story because it's extremely important. The first time I went to Agra to start my work there, Agra was really focused on a lot of breeding to take varieties to farmers. One thing stood out for me, breeding of cowpeas in Burkina Faso. So cowpea is highly attacked by pests. So, and yet women really love cowpea because it's what they cook to give their children. It's what they sell in the market. So with the support of the Rockefeller Foundation and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, research was done. This cowpea, they got this variety that could significantly resist pest attack. And the farmers got like 3-4 times more than they had gotten before. So this lady planted this variety. And she said, when she got the yield the first time, she said, why wasn't I given this before? And one of our scientists said, but we did have it. She said, if I had gotten this before, my daughters would never have gotten married. No, seriously. And that stuck with me because I only managed to go to school because my father could sells a crop, a cow here, and send me to school. I know what it means for a woman to say, if I had had this crop, my daughter would not have gotten married, she would have gone to school. So that's how critical this is for farmers. And then there's the additional factor of saying they are women crops. So a lot of these crops haven't gotten some of the attention they should be getting because they are not market crops. The market crops, you find them sitting with the men. I've gone to places where I ask farmers. Every time we are working in the field, I ask, where are the farmers? So, and when I find farmers, it's these women. And I'm like, where are the men? They're like, if the coffee fails, they'll come. If the coffee fails, they'll come here. They'll join us in this bean conversation. They'll only come when the coffee fails. So just to really validate what you're doing and the fact that these crops are important. But there are two things to link it to modern life now today. I completely believe that Africa has surprised the world in surviving the Russia-Ukraine crisis. I hope this is politically correct to say it, because of the diversity of the commodities that the continent has and the ability to be able to tap into that. We actually thought we were going to have a crisis. But go to Ghana, you don't find fields and fields of maize. You find yam, you find cocoa, you find wherever, That's how Ghana survived the crisis. The last point on LGRF, we had a fantastic LGRF led by a woman. The president of Tanzania is a woman. So I want to believe that's why this LGRF was significantly different. But what was very, very different is her commitment to agriculture this time. She committed to have a big LGRF because she understood that there's an opportunity to now really tap into the agricultural sector. She asked several times, how many people can I invite? How many from the private sector? How many from the public sector? And she designed a program around youth, and she committed that they would mobilize $1.4 billion to invest in the agricultural sector. She has already put on the table more than half of that, and this time around, she was able to mobilize money from the rest of us to make sure that the program goes forward. The reason I'm saying that is many of these commodities may not have the market you're looking for. In Rwanda, when I was Minister of Agriculture, it was very critical to go out there and ask Harvest Plus, ask a seed company, which, again, thanks to Rockefeller Foundation and BMGF, these institutions are out there. Multiply this seed for me. You get tons and tons, cut them into half a kilo, and distribute, make sure that every farmer has them. That's what we did. Because iron fortified beans were that critical, we needed to make sure that every household has iron fortified beans. We could only do that as a state, right? The power of the state to get nutrition to people, to improve nutrition, to support SMEs, we wouldn't have done it alone as a state if SMEs hadn't participated. So there's a whole ecosystem out there, which is what you saw at AGRF, an ecosystem of researchers and scientists that now have fabulous tools to use, an ecosystem of SMEs that are now doing businesses, and governments that, because of COVID-19, because of Russia-Ukraine crisis, are so tuned in now that we should be taking advantage of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kalibata. I think a message coming through about the problems, but also the potential and the possibilities that there are solutions and political will. That case of Tanzania, it's exactly what you were also talking about, what we need from the government side, opening the door and bringing the message to the people and working with partners. Let me bring you in here, Professor McCarthy. We want to find out from you then about climate change and how it is impacting agriculture and soil health in our context.
Okay. Thank you for having me. So I think it's fair to have a description of the agricultural landscape in Africa, and it's predominantly dominated by smallholders and rely largely on rain-fed agriculture, and input levels are very low. So anything that has to disrupt the rainfall distribution potentially would impact productivity. And increasingly, the distribution of rainfall has been erratic over the years and with negative consequences for crop productivity. Recent analysis by the recent IPPC reports analyzed weather data from between 1980 to 2015 and came out with significant increase in temperatures of up to 0.7 degrees, and also changes in rainfall, total rainfall amounts increasing in most places, in some places which are known to be drier, and then decreasing in others. But what this does not say, this is talking about total rainfall amounts, but then it is the distribution of the rainfalls that is important for smallholder farmers. And also significant about that is the fact that the extreme events are on the increase, that the frequencies are becoming higher. So we're talking about droughts, and then we are talking about floods. So for instance, in Ghana currently, especially in the northern part of Ghana, we have instances where within the same season, we have both drought and flood. So farmers plant, and after 3 weeks into the season, there is a drought, maybe about 2 to 3 weeks, and the crops suffer, then the rain sets in again. And then around the reproductive stage, you have torrential amounts of rain. So within 3 weeks, continuously we have rain. As we speak, the northern part of Ghana is flooded, more because this year there was a lot of rains in the entire region. So the dam in Burkina Faso, which is upstream, overflowed. So they had to open their gate to spill water. And this also created more problem for those up north, even up to the south. So even the major hydropower plants in the south have to be open to spill of excess water. So the issue of climate change of variability is already eminent currently. And I was part of a study that was led by AgMIP, the Columbia University, that worked with a number of national scientists within the sub-Saharan African sub-region to look at what the projections are for the year 2050. And the projections are that for cereals, generally there will be a reduction in yield. And this reduction is going to vary depending on which cereal you are looking at. So some are more resilient than others. And also depending on the kind of management practices that are undertaken, also the soil health. So soil health is also very critical and is one of the main limiting factors. And currently it's estimated that about 46% of the soil, our cultivated lands are degraded. And with the current pace of degradation, by 2050, more than half of these lands would be rendered unusable. And this is something that is scary that we have to look at and see how best to work at this. And so for me, an initiative like the VAX is a very important one, especially as it's looking at different food categories. And we have some that will focus a bit more on the soil health and others more on the crops. So I think going forward, it should be more of an issue of looking at an integrated system and rather move away from looking at the more traditional crops alone, so that we are able to benefit from the synergies that they have. I had a brief look at the AGRF that just ended not a few weeks ago, and I looked at the three main steps that we were looking at. The first one is to recover, basically rebuilding systems that are recovering from shocks, regenerate the existing system by looking at the system, integrating the various components to have a resilient system, and then the ACT, which is call for urgent action to enable this to happen. And so I see a sync between this and then the VAX initiative. So my call would be to maybe major investors to have a look at this. And if you are able to have enough or adequate investment into this initiative, and together with working with the relevant local actors on the continent, we have the potential of impacting many livelihoods. And I say this because we have several reports of cases where this had been. So 2015, 2019, it was reported about 45 million people on the Horn of Africa required humanitarian assistance due to climate-related food emergencies, and another 62 million from Southern and Eastern Africa required a similar support as a result of the same climate-related emergency. So this is an initiative that we should all feel to be part of and also contribute to ensure that together we are able to impact on lives for, if not for anything, but for the satisfaction that we have contributed to maybe the well-being of people, and more particularly for women and children, which most of the time are disproportionately affected by some of these food emergencies.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor McCarthy. Dr. Steiner, as the Rockefeller Foundation, your name keeps coming up again and again. You've been a stakeholder in this vision for adapted crops and soils from the very, very beginning, embracing VAX. Just educate us a little. What is your motivation, your interest in underutilized crops? I learned a new term today. Thank you, Dr. Fowler. And healthy soil.
Thank you, Rebbe. Well, first of all, Carrie Fowler and Catherine Bettini are very compelling people. So when they convince you of an idea, it makes a lot of sense. It also fit directly in the strategy that we've been developing. As most of you know, most of our food system has really focused on maximizing yield. And when you optimize just in one thing, you end up unfortunately, with the food system now, where our diets are the number one risk for early mortality, and the way we grow our food is actually damaging the planet in multiple ways. And so we started thinking about what is a quality diet, what is quality food, and when you ask those kinds of questions, you really do come to, we need diversity. And this was really came out in some of the science work we did. When you ask, how much do we know about what's actually in our food? Turns out we only measure about 1% of the biomolecules in our food because we just didn't have the tools. In the last few years, we've been investing in something called the periodic table of food, which is using mass spectrometry and bioinformatics to really look at the full thousands of biomolecules, literally thousands, that are actually nutritionally important, but we just haven't had the ability to see them. It's kind of like we've been looking at the sky with our eyes, and suddenly now we have the Hubble telescope. And boy, you learn some really interesting things. For example, the indigenous foods that Carrie was mentioning, those are extraordinarily rich in nutrients, and we just didn't really even understand that fully. So that's one thing, is that the diversity of foods are going to contribute to a much healthier diet, address things like metabolic syndrome and all the other issues that we've been facing. The other is when you compare food that's grown in healthy soil versus unhealthy soil, it's dramatic. I mean, it's sometimes orders of magnitude more nutrient dense when you're growing crops in soils that are healthy and alive and diverse, and that's important. Like literally, you can have a bag of spinach that's grown in healthy soil that is more nutrient dense than 5 bags of spinach that are grown in unhealthy soil. So the importance of this diverse crops, healthy soils, is critical to the future of humanity. And yet we have indexed 80% of all research, I think, has gone into like 5 crops. And then you end up having the issue with the cowpeas that are just completely underinvested and underutilized. So what Carrie and Catherine mentioned is just, it fits so beautifully, importantly, in the vision of a future food system that is healthy for us, that's healthy for the planet, that's resilient. Professor McCarthy mentioned the incredible challenges we're going to see. We're not going to be able to address them if we're not creating these resilient polycultures that enable us to navigate the waves that are going to be coming towards us. So the one last point I would say is it also fit in with our school feeding work that we're doing around the world. And too often we feed our children refined, small, narrow, non-diverse crops. And this, I think, is going to enable us to really feed our children the kind of diversity that a good brain needs to have in order to develop. And that ensures our future, because those children are going to be solving the problems that we've created for them.
Yeah.
So I'll end there.
Can I have the microphone back to Dr. Fowler? I have a question for. Oh, you've got your microphone, Dr. Fowler. I just want to ask about buy-in. Not every country is like a Tanzania, where the head of state is so energetic and enthusiastic. You highlighted the problems and the opportunities. Change is very, very difficult for so many people. How do you, with VAX as the context, convince governments and farmers to do things differently? Why should they embrace VAX? Not just governments in Africa, but even beyond. What is the strategy for Persuade?
Is this on? It's on. It's easy to see how a program like this wouldn't work in the absence of farmers having actual options. And one of the things that frightens me the most about the future, or concerns me the most, is if we continue on this trajectory where we focus only on a few crops, then farmers will never have a viable option for growing any other crops. We're not talking about scaling back the kind of research that institutions like CIMMYT are undertaking with wheat and corn, maize, and other crops. Not at all. We need to double down on that research to make sure that they're as adapted and as productive as possible. But if that's where all of our money goes, then we won't have any other options and farmers won't have those options. So I think the first thing to do, and we know how to do it, we have the technology, and increasingly we have the people, the capacity to do this work through the efforts of organizations like the African Orphan Crops Consortium, which has trained up 150 more plant breeders in Africa, about half of them women, embedded each and every one of them in national programs and trained on these particular crops and were ready to go to work. So I think what we're doing is mobilizing the resources we already have, financing that kind of work in these particular crops and giving options and countries, giving those options to farmers and the countries. Will everyone adopt it instantly overnight? No, they won't. But I'll invite you to just consider the fact that we ourselves, I think everyone on this stage and everyone in the audience has seen rather large changes in the food system that we're in, and probably changes in your own diet. So change is possible. It comes. And in this case, it's really necessary.
Dr. Fowler, quickly, I can't resist. You said that changes in our diet. You spoke about 300 crops. More research was done, downscale to 60, and even amongst those, you have to identify which ones are climate change resistant, and so on. I'm asking a self-serving question here. Do we have to change the way we eat now?
I don't think anyone on this stage or involved in this work wants to dictate what people eat.
Okay.
That's not, we're not being judgmental or prescriptive in that way. We're simply providing options that they may not have now. And I think they'll embrace some of those options. And over time, this will transform the food system.
Thank you, because we have a vision for adapted crops and soils. Dr. Kalibata, let's follow the money. I'm going to come to the audience in just a moment. Who bears then the responsibility to execute VEX? I ask this because a lot of your work and your messaging is around the collaborative efforts between the private and the public sector. Share some thoughts.
Is it? Okay, thank you. I mean, there's a lot of people involved in the journey that a seed makes from the lab or from the scientist's hand to the farmer. There's been a lot of investment. We've particularly as Agro, we have invested in strengthening that system, what we call the seed system. We've invested in businesses, small SMEs, so that when you go to a village, there's a place where you can buy seed. These are called agro dealerships, where retailing of seed and other inputs is done. But I think the most critical part of that ecosystem is the business that actually works with the researchers. When I was in the government, one of the things I failed to understand was how we had so much work happening in the CGIR and how we had so much work happening in the NAS, but how we had so little making it to the farmer. I was in the ministry for 7 years. In those 7 years, I failed to understand why, because every time I asked, we need seed, they gave me 1 kilo. They said, we have 1 kilo. I'm like, what does that mean? They are scientists. The scientists give you, I did my work, this is 1 kilo. I'm like, okay, I need seed to take to thousands, millions of farmers. When I came to Agro is when I found out that there's something called early generation seed, which was a gap between the actual seed that they were giving me as 1 kilo, the scientists in the science miners, and what the farmers needed. Now, there's businesses there in that ecosystem that are actually taking that 1 kilo of seed, and we've worked a lot to support those businesses so that they can multiply it and make it available to other businesses that actually can then take it to farmers. It's easy for some crops than for others. For some crops where they can, the whole ecosystem is able to make money as they take seeds to farmers. And by the way, farmers can pay for seed if there's real value in why they pay for seed. But there are other times where we really need to push in public resources, and we have to be prepared to push in public resources if there's real public value, or especially on nutrition. We have to push in resources. And again, my preference is that we use ecosystems that are already existing. You use that opportunity to build the consciousness of SMEs that nutrition is important as well. So even as you're pushing public resources, use these businesses so that when you're not there as public, they're able to understand and to continue what is going on. So there's a whole ecosystem that is being built. It's not everywhere. It's not deep enough. It needs extension, and more recently we've added on what you're calling village-based advisors to ensure that there's a connection between the farmer and the businesses, and that needs to work. So, but it needs to be deep enough, because it's not deep enough, it's not reaching every farmer. So that's probably what I would say about that.
All right, so I'm going to open the floor for some questions. Remember that we do have pressure of time because the Secretary of State will be coming in a short while. So succinct, brief, to the point. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your comments, and your questions. Right, I shouldn't have said comments and your questions. You either do a comment or a question. All right, where do we start? Does anybody have any observations and thoughts? Otherwise, I'll just carry on. You don't want that. There we go. I think we've got a hand up there on that side. Yes? No? Right.
Hello, everyone. Greetings from my island called Mauritius in the Indian Ocean. Thank you to whomsoever is responsible for the invitation sent out to the Embassy of Mauritius here in New York. I am the Minister of Foreign Affairs. I have left the General Assembly to attend this event. I am so happy to be here, and I came running for one very simple reason, because I heard that my good friend Agnes Kalibata is going to be here. I stand up to say that I am now Minister for Foreign Affairs, but I was previously, as Agnes knows very well, I know you can't see me because of the lights, but I was previously the Minister for Agriculture for my country. I want to stand up to say, comment that I so appreciate the work being done, not only by the distinguished gathering here, but also in other institutions on the question of food security. I want to share my experience to say that it's not only about, we should not only concentrate about increasing production and increasing production only. The problem of the farmer has always been and will continue to be the question of avoiding wastage. Wastage at the farm, wastage whether it's pre-harvest or post-harvest or during transportation. Transportation from the farm to the nearest market leads to a lot of waste. And Agnes is so humble that she's talking about Tanzania, but she has not talked about her own country, Rwanda. By investing in very small cold rooms at regular intervals on the way from the farm to the market has reduced considerably, I cannot remember the numbers, but considerably the food wastage in Rwanda, and that is an example to follow. I also want to talk about the question of food waste. If we look at the estimates of the last report I have seen, the United Nations Environment Programme report of 2021, 30% of the total world food production of food is wasted. All put together, whether it's at farm level, it's from farm to fork. Farm to fork is not only about production, it's also about waste. 30% of world food production represents the total food productions of the European Union. There is something we have to do about that. We should stop. There should be a pledge by companies, there should be a pledge by hotels, there should be a pledge by everybody to stop wasting food, by whether it's by airlines, whether in the hotel where I am staying, there should be a pledge. We should stop wasting food, and that will greatly help in food security. Second point I want to raise is duplicity. I have unfortunately seen there is duplicity in effort, especially when it comes to research. Everybody is researching, but is the research trickling down to the farmer? You know, when I talk to the farmer asks me a very simple question. He doesn't want to know the research. He wants to know, he asked me a simple question. What do you want me to plant? What do you want me to put in the soil? If you're telling me I will not be able to grow this plant, just give me an alternative and I will do it. We should be able to think and look at food production from the farmer's eyes. And there are huge, one last minute, please.
Half a minute.
All right. We should be able to have a scorecard about about the efforts we are putting in, not only for research, but how many boreholes or wells did we drill in a particular area? The scorecard should also change.
Okay, last point.
Totally, keep the effort going, and we are all in this together, and we should find alternatives. And it is important to highlight that this year is the International Year for Millets. That's a very important point also not to forget. If we asked the question earlier, should we change our diet? I just want to suggest, try for once, instead of cornflakes, try millet flakes, and you will see the difference.
I'll
Thank
remember
you.
that, Minister. Thank you so very much. But Dr. Fowler did speak about talking to farmers about what to plant, where, when, and so on. But I'll give you a chance, Professor McCarthy, to just answer that part, because I know you are a researcher on the ground, the research trickling down, as the Minister expressed concern.
Yes, so in Ghana, I can talk of sort of a system where we have what they refer to as the research extension linkage. So functionally, there is a forum that enables researchers, scientists to meet up with extension agents to translate to them, the scientific findings, and then they are supposed to carry it on to the farmers. But I must admit, this is not not working very efficiently as it should. And a lot of times, scientists are more interested in coming out with findings and how are they assessed. And this has a lot to do with how further they are able to go with the output. If you assess a scientist based on number of publications and maybe the score for extension is not as high, then the tendency is that they end up with their publication and then expect the extension agents to carry it forward. So I had the opportunity to work, we have about 10 weeks with the University of Cambridge, and there was a model I found which was very interesting. In the plant science department where I was, they had a unit that was specifically responsible for, going to every scientist to find out what they have done every month, and then trying to find a way of translating this into very simple language for ordinary person to read and understand. And then they had open days that enables them to share this out. And I thought that was a very good model that we could learn from, at least from my country, to ensure that output from the field is now coming out. And increasingly, a lot of donors are insisting on this. To be part of your proposal, you should show a plan to ensure that whatever you are doing is making an impact. So we have a lot of stakeholder engagement to ensure that they are part of the process, and then also receive feedback from their end. I was sharing an example of a crop variety that I met when I was doing my PhD study in northern Ghana of sorghum. And this is very high yielding sorghum variety and very tasty, but farmers rejected it, with the simple reason being that even though it's high yielding, the panicle is short to be able to hold onto the grains. And what it meant was that birds are able to perch and feed on it. So farmers need to engage labor to scare birds. And the traditional ones are long panicles and normally will droop, so the birds are not able to perch on it. So just a simple fact that farmers were not part of that process in breeding made it, not attractive for farmers to use because labor is really an issue. So there are things going.
Okay, so I will allow one more comment because we've got about 2.5 minutes until the Secretary of State comes in. So who's going to have a go? Let's give a chance to this side. Anybody? Okay, there, in the front there. That's the last one. Thank you.
Hi, I'll try and make it quick. I'm Lori Pearson with Catholic Relief Services, and we have been following this initiative since it was first announced. We are really excited about this initiative and what we're hearing today about the focus on people-level impact and farmers. And just want to invite everyone here to an event we're hosting on Friday that's going to be talking about making this vision a reality, bringing in some of our experiences and our partners' experiences with a focus on the soils element. So really excited to hear what you're saying about crops, but would also love to invite your panelists to share more about soils. And hopefully we'll see you on Friday.
Okay, you've been invited, folks.
Yes, that's at the United Nations Church Center Friday at 9.
Okay, 1 minute.
Yeah, so I think the soils is part of what we are currently working on. So we are trying to look at how the systems are resilient. So we are looking at the climate, the soils, and how the interaction between these two work to be able to produce crops. So we can tell that if the soil has low carbon, then its ability to hold on to water is low. So what it means then is if you have short rain or less or poor distribution of rainfall, then that's all our crops growing on those soils are likely to be more negatively impacted than soils that have higher capacity to hold on to water. So the soil is also part of what we're doing.
Final thoughts, Dr. Steiner. You are our host today. Final thoughts, your vision for VEX.
Well, I am delighted that we were able to host Carrie and the team, and I think this contributes to a vision of a future that we all want, which is one that is a food system that's regenerative, equitable, and nourishing. And we can't do that with without a diversity of crops and without healthy soils. So thank you.
Thank you. Closing comments, Dr. Kalibata?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, because you ended on health soils. We have a soil health. The African Union is hosting soil health, fertilizer and soil health summit in Nairobi, 5 to 6 November. The last time a similar summit was held was 2006. So, yeah, so this is the time you get to be part of defining what happens in the next 20 years, over the next 20 years. So please be there.
You've been invited, folks.
Yeah.
You're the only one not inviting people, Dr. Fowler. Shall I give you a chance to invite people to your party? Let me thank you, my esteemed panelists, for making a conversation about crops and soil fun, but informative and challenging as well. I thank you so kindly. There's never enough time. I know so many of you would have had comments and questions, but this dialogue continues. It's not the end of it. Thank you so very much for your time. Dr. Fowler, Dr. Kalibata, Professor Mekani, and our host, we thank you so very much for being with us today. Thank you, Dr. Steiner. Thank you. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, the time has come. Catherine, you did say earlier that we've got 2 speakers who are going to address us this evening. I would like at this moment to welcome Raj Shah, the president of the Rockefeller Foundation, and coming in with him will be the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. I'll step off stage when I see them. Okay, don't be cross with me and say, I could have asked one more question. Now we've got silence. These things happen. If I'd given you the minute, you would have taken 5 minutes. Am I right, Foreign Minister? I promise they're here. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, let's hear from Dr. Raj Shah, President of the Rockefeller Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. How are you? Here we are at UNGA Week, marching our way through, and we have a really exciting opportunity today to hear from a very, very special leader in our country and on our planet, Secretary Tony Blinken. Before I hand it over to the Secretary, I just wanted to make a few remarks. First, Carrie, thank you for you and your team and the leadership you've offered on behalf of the United States government in efforts to fight hunger and in efforts to consider how our long history in agricultural research and science can be deployed against the coming climate threats. We really do applaud your efforts. I also want to take this moment just to give a quick shout out to two of our teammates, Catherine Bertini, who has been a friend and mentor for a long time, and I'm proud to say is part of the foundation effort that's been working with Carrie, and Roy Steiner, our leader of our food and agriculture portfolio here at the Rockefeller Foundation. Thanks to you both for your amazing continued leadership and passion. As I hand this over so we can hear from the Secretary, I just want to make 2 or 3 quick points. The first is, in 2001, when I first started learning about global agriculture and global hunger issues, about 13.8% of the global population was hungry. By 2015, when I left the Obama administration and we signed the SDGs and the Paris Agreement, I think it was about 7.5 or 7.7% of the global population was hungry. Today, that number has gone up past 9%, and every credible estimate indicates that number will soon shoot well beyond the 13, 14% we experienced 23 years ago. That is unacceptable. It is simply unacceptable. If we think that there are too much instability, too many coups, too many moments of unnecessary suffering and violence and migration and strife and political dissent and political conflict, now, just wait until 14, 15, 16% of the global population are hungry. And the hungry are mostly in those places that are resource deprived, most climate affected, and most insecure, and least well governed. That's not a recipe for success, and it's not part of the vision of how to keep us safe. Second point is that alliances, and the Secretary has rebuilt alliances in so many ways around the world on every topic. Alliances are necessary to fight hunger now more than ever. And by coming together here and by the Secretary coming here, you are part of rebuilding the alliance with the political determination to fight hunger. The third point is the last one I'll make, which is Rockefeller's longest serving employee, actually second longest serving employee, worked here for 44 years. He won the Nobel Peace Prize for his investments and his research in agricultural science that went on to create a green revolution that moved 1 billion people off of the brink of poverty. And if you walk around the corner there, you'll see a wall where we celebrate Dr. Norman Borlaug in a subtle but important manner. And I'm convinced that it is the science that Carrie, you and the State Department and the US government and others are coming together to reinvest in that will be our best path once again to protect people from hunger, from climate, and from dislocation that we know is coming if we don't act now. So with that, I get to introduce my friend, Secretary Tony Blinken, who has shown passion, determination, and an incredible commitment to this issue, while also protecting democracy, security, and the rule of law across our planet, not least of which to say, and building the coalition around Ukraine. So I will hand it over to you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very, very much. So we're, about halfway through High Level Week, I think, which is known at the department basically as speed dating for diplomats. And we have lots of events, lots of meetings, lots of gatherings. But I have to tell you, I was really looking forward to this particular meeting, this particular gathering. And I'll tell you why in a few minutes. But let me just start by saying to Raj, my friend and colleague of many years, thank you. Thank you for the extraordinary leadership that you've shown here, the leadership that you showed in government, but also the partnership on this issue and so many others. And that includes hosting us here just about a month ago to meet with and learn from agricultural leaders about what it's going to take to meet growing global food demand. It was, for me at least, a very enlightening session. Carrie was there, and we continue to learn a lot every single day. Carrie Fowler is a remarkable resource for the State Department and for the country. The State Department's Special Envoy for Global Food Security, known I think to everyone in this room. Carrie's taught me more about soil and seeds than I ever knew I wanted to know. And we're also joined by another extraordinary colleague, Jose Fernandez, our Undersecretary of State for Economic Growth, Energy, and the Environment. So we're here in large part because, among many other challenges we face, we are facing a global food crisis, one that, as you all know, is fueled by climate change, COVID, and now especially conflict. This emergency has left 700 million people undernourished. It's helped stunt the growth of more than 30% of sub-Saharan African children under 5. It's driven the price of staple crops like rice to a 15-year high. When I think about just one of those statistics, stunted growth for more than 30% of sub-Saharan African children under 5, I'm thinking about my own kids who were almost exactly that age. I'm thinking about what President Biden has said, which is that if your kids have an empty stomach, pretty much nothing else matters. It is the foundation of everything. And so, as Raj said, we're tackling a lot of other challenges around the world. But if we don't get this right, I actually don't think anything else really matters. We have to, as a matter of our humanity, and quite frankly, as a matter of our profound self-interest. We are working in our government to try to deliver solutions to, in the first instance, mitigate the impact of the immediate crisis we faced. If you go back to January of 2021, we provided more than $17.5 billion to address global food insecurity. And we're continuing to work to rally the world to deliver the urgent relief that people need, people facing acute hunger in this moment, including the millions affected by Russia's aggression against Ukraine, the world's breadbasket. We continue to join the UN and countries around the world in calling on Russia to stop its attacks on Ukrainian ports and grain silos, to allow desperately needed grain to reach the world. You all know this, but it's important to keep emphasizing the fact that we had to have a Black Sea Grain Initiative negotiated by the United Nations and Turkey. That never should have been necessary in the first place. It only became necessary because Russia invaded Ukraine and then, having done that, blockaded its ports. The result of that initiative, getting the grain moving again, meant that some 35 million tons of grain got out of Ukraine and principally to the developing world. 2/3 of the wheat coming out through that got to the developing world, the equivalent of 18 billion loaves of bread. Now Putin's torn it up and is trying to use it once again as political leverage. Weaponizing food, talk about unacceptable, that should be near the top of the list. So we're working aggressively on this to try to mitigate the damage that's being done, to look, in the case of Ukraine, for alternate routes, but also more broadly to come to the assistance of people who desperately need it right now. I'm proud of the fact that the United States is by far the largest donor in the world to the World Food Program. We provide about 50% of the World Food Program's budget every year, I would note that other very large countries that are often in the headlines provide less than 1% of its budget. But here's the thing, and this is something I'm profoundly convinced of from the conversations I've been able to have over the last couple of years with colleagues, especially colleagues in Africa. Even as we focus on these near-term needs, even as that is an obligation for us, we can't lose sight of the fundamental challenge of the coming decades. Feeding more and more people in the world where growing food is becoming harder and harder. And working to genuinely give countries the capacity to have sustainable, productive capacity of their own. This is what countries around the world most want. Yes, they deeply value the emergency assistance, but what they really want to be able to do is stand on their own feet. And we have the means, I'm convinced, to help them do that, and so much more. I think there's huge potential that countries that right now are not able to feed their own people, to turn around and not only feed their own people, but feed many others. There is so much untapped productive capacity around the world if we can just do our jobs and do them right. But the challenge we have, especially if you project out over the next 25 or so years, is this. Global demand for food is projected to increase by 50% between now and 2050. Over the same period, prolonged droughts, horrific wildfires, catastrophic storms caused or exacerbated by climate change, we know could reduce yields by as much as 30%. So we've already got a huge problem. And if we're looking out to 2050, we see hugely growing demand and potentially significantly diminishing supply. We have to do something about that, and we have to do it now. Our ability to provide sufficient, affordable, and nutritious food in the future, I think, depends on making some significant decisions today. President Biden talks a lot about what he calls an inflection point, something that comes along every 6 or 7 generations. And what it means is this. The changes in the international environment right now are so significant, so profound, that the decisions that we and other countries make today are going to shape the future, not just for the next few years, but for the coming decades. And this is the kind of moment that comes around only once every 6 or 7 generations. We had it after World War II. We had it after the Cold War. Now we're facing such a moment again. And this question of food security, I think, is a powerful example of that. Quite literally, the decisions we make now in the next few years are going to shape the next decades. So in February of this year, the United States, the African Union, the Food and Agricultural Organization came together and launched something we call the Vision for Adapted Crops and Soils, or VACS. VACS is part of USAID's Feed the Future initiative, and USAID has been our extraordinary leader on all things food security. And Feed the Future has been our comprehensive response to food insecurity. And we are devoting $1 billion annually to strengthen food systems, to expand social safety nets, to boost nutrition in over 40 countries. But the new element we've added, the new approach that Carrie has really helped pioneer and shape, VACS, twofold. First, we're investing above ground, identifying the indigenous and traditional African crops that are most nutritious, but also most resilient to climate impacts. And then we're taking them, improving these varieties, and delivering them to consumers and markets. At the same time, we're investing below ground, mapping, conserving, building healthy soils. Because as Dr. Fowler reminds us, poor soils do not produce rich harvests. In July, the United States committed $100 million to VACS, $30 million to adapt crops, $70 million to enhance the health of soil. And working through the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD, we have also established a new multi-donor funding platform to help finance those better seeds and soils. I am very proud of the fact that the United States is a founding donor, and I have a very simple request to you tonight. Join us. Commit to this effort so that we can demonstrate real action on climate adaptation ahead of COP28 in Dubai. Make this investment in our shared future. I think we have a powerful opportunity to make a profound difference, to do the shaping of the next decades starting right now. Now, I know for all of us involved in this, the task can seem daunting, even overwhelming. But we've been here before, as Raj reminds us. In the middle of the last century, experts were predicting a population bomb. They were warning of mass starvation. I remember studying this in school. And of course, it was Norman Borlaug, working through the Rockefeller Foundation, who catalyzed the Green Revolution and is literally credited with saving billions of lives. Think about that for just a minute. Talk about extraordinary, that's the definition. So, here tonight, and the reason I was so excited about being with you tonight is because I think we have in this room and in the networks of people, organizations, institutions, expertise that you're all connected to, I think we have the ability to once again mobilize our respective governments and institutions to harness agricultural ingenuity to feed the world. What an extraordinary and wonderful mission. Thank you for being willing to take part in it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you to the Secretary of State. And we conclude tonight with a reflection on your words, Dr. Fowler. You said that there are many problems. We understand the scale of the problem, but something is very different. Something hits differently. And that speaks to the enormity of the problem. And to reiterate the words of the Secretary of State, that the Rockefeller Foundation is on board, many partners are on board, but today was really about inviting new partnerships, reflections, and investments in our journey to a vision for adapted crops and soils. We conclude today and invite you to the reception, but before you go, SDG number 2, Zero Hunger. We heard on Sunday at an event that I moderated, Transforming Food Systems Transformation, that we are 7 agricultural seasons away from the 2030 goal. And by all indications, we're not going to meet zero hunger without your political will, your support, your activism, your science, your big pockets. We must end hunger. We must achieve food security. We must achieve improved nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. Thank you so very much. Enjoy the evening.
Next one down.
Yeah.